Ishadi and Tara and Radha is here somewhere at the back. Yeah. Dipankar, thank you so much for inviting me to speak here. And I think I am probably in the majority here, as a lot of the people have been students of Professor Béteille. And I'm going to only speak about my own experience of him as a student, because it really shaped who I am today as a teacher. And there are many people who've written beautiful reminiscences. I see Neera Burra there. Many people who visited him till the end. Janaki Abraham, Rita Brara, and Nandini Sundar. And I think I will always regret that I didn't stay as much in touch with Professor Béteille as I would have liked. I missed out on a lot. But I'll nevertheless draw on what I knew about him and how it shaped me. So, part of being at D School was to be part of this really sort of sophisticated group of people. That's how we saw ourselves in the sociology department. The economics people didn't have it. We did. We were in sociology. And it had quite a lot to do with Professor Béteille. Because first of all, the name. And part of learning to be a D School sophisticate was to know how to pronounce it correctly. You did not say Batel. No. The L's are silent in French. And later you learn not only how to pronounce it correctly, but also how to write it with the accent marks in the correct place. So that aura of foreign glamour that distinguished Professor Béteille when we entered his class as MA students of sociology didn't quite fade with familiarity. We knew, of course, that he was Indian and that he broke into Bangla when he spoke to fellow Bengali students. But we also knew that in true Bhadralok fashion, he inhabited an Anglo-French intellectual milieu with consummate confidence. His way of being at home in the world was our first lesson in how not to be overawed by or defensively dismissive of the great white gods of sociology. Then, in those days, the Holy Trinity of Marx, Weber, and Durkheim. Today, I suppose we would all join Foucault to that list and make it a quartet, a holy quartet. But he taught us to take these thinkers and to make them our companions in critical thinking. And when I now look back, I have a better sense of how important this was. So I was a student of sociology in D School in the mid-1980s. And this was a time when the post-emergency surge of social movements around civil liberties and environmental issues. Those of you who were around at that time will remember that this was 1984 had just happened, state-sponsored violence against Sikhs. 1984 is also when the Bhopal gas disaster happened within months of each other. And in that particular political climate, the events that were happening, we were drawn to Karl Marx and Mahatma Gandhi, to Antonio Gramsci and Ivan Illich. And we were sort of giddy with all that we read, with our radical critiques of the state, of capitalism, industrialism, and the dominant model of development. And we dismissed every other inquiry as either just boring or irrelevant or complicit in maintaining the status quo. So we read feverishly, but we also read narrowly, and we measured an author's worth only by their ideology, discarding those who didn't quite meet the mark. And this wasn't, come to think of it now, education really. It was indoctrination, even though we were inflicting it on ourselves. And we would probably have continued thus, well versed in the radical literature, but little else, self-righteous and probably insufferable, if it hadn't been for professors like André Béteille, who gently insisted that we put our political certitudes on hold and that we open our minds to other approaches and points of view. We should read Alexis de Tocqueville on American democracy. We should read Max Weber's lecture on politics as vocation, and not just Das Kapital or Hind Swaraj. Our ambition to set the world right would be better served if we learn to think about inequality comparatively across time and space. And as everyone who's tried knows, reading Weber is very hard work. The department faculty also emphasize that students should read original texts or their translations, not commentaries. So we would have floundered if it was not for the lifeline of Professor Béteille's classes. His lectures were the acme of lucidity. They were elegantly structured, beautifully clear, and they had been honed to perfection over the years. And now that I'm a teacher, I actually marvel at how brilliantly he distilled complex ideas into a form that students could digest. So we could then return to the library with a glimmer of understanding of what we were reading. We would even gheraw Professor Béteille when we were baffled by what we encountered in courses taught by other professors, kinship and symbolism in particular. His door was always open, and he never turned away a student in intellectual distress. And I am deeply envious of Professor Xaxa for having inherited his lecture notes. Now that you have retired, Virginius, you might want to pass them along. But if teaching as a profession fitted André Béteille like one of his well-tailored tweed jackets, it also imposed a discipline that he embraced. He never ever missed a class or a tutorial. He always walked in on time, always prepared, and fully present. It takes caring and commitment to be unfailingly generous to one's students and colleagues. It also takes a lot of homework. For generations of students who quietly absorbed the ethic behind this effort, teaching transformed from a career into a calling. And when I'm feeling frustrated by students who use ChatGPT for assignments or who show up for class without having done the assigned reading, I think of Professor Béteille's unflagging spirit as a teacher, and I again marvel at his constancy and his commitment. In Science as a Vocation, Weber noted that good scholars can be poor teachers, and vice versa. In Professor Béteille's case, we were fortunate that he was both. His first book, Caste, Class and Power, Changing Patterns of Social Stratification in a Tanjore Village, was first published in 1965. But it prepared the ground for what we today call intersectionality. I'd recommend it to any beginner in sociology as a clear exposition for how theory must be processed through empirical analysis. And several of the speakers here have spoken and written incisively about Professor Béteille's scholarship, Dipankar most notably, and Ram Guha has written about his politics, so I will not dwell on his research on inequality and stratification, other than to note that when I was doing research among Adivasis in the Narmada Valley, his essay in the European Journal of Sociology on the concept of indigeneity in India was a major catalyst for my own thinking. And among other things, his work on the middle classes was way ahead of his time. And Raka Rai and I were fortunate to have him deliver the keynote address at a conference that resulted in our volume, Elite and Everyman, the Cultural Politics of the Middle Classes in India. And we were among many here who have been influenced directly by Professor Béteille's scholarship. I think Professor Béteille was fond of me. He would smile and he would remind me, Amita, I also taught your father. And my father, Amita Baviskar, was a student and later a colleague. So besides lectures, conversations, and comments on drafts, Professor Béteille also gave me career advice and a little bit of help along the way. I'm just going to end with one story because I inherited many things from my father, but among the way, rather unexpectedly and unfortunately, I also inherited a bit of the lingering factionalism that so fractured the department in the 1970s. So when I submitted my PhD, slightly revised to Oxford University Press, I don't know whether Ishadi will remember this, where she was then a senior editor for Sociology. I think it was the sharp differences and the polarized sociology community in Delhi, I'd like to believe that resulted in the external reader giving my manuscript a blisteringly bad review. And basically telling OUP, you'd be crazy to publish this is junk. And but Professor Béteille had read my thesis and he had found it worthwhile. And perhaps that influenced Ishadi also, because she gave me very sensible and good advice on how to reframe the manuscript, which I went ahead and did. And so I think if it wasn't for the Béteilles, In the Belly of the River would not really exist. And so thank you for that. And later, when I was once bristling with indignation and unfair book review, Professor Béteille just told me, let it go, don't respond, don't rise to the bait. And I teach where I do today at Ashoka University, thanks to Professor Béteille, who told me that, I've just taught the most interesting and exciting bunch of young people in the Young India Fellowship. And I think you would enjoy teaching them too. And I was at a research institute and I was missing that engagement with young people. So thanks to Professor Béteille, I went on to work there. And he was the first chancellor of Ashoka University. And though in his latter years, he occupied several such distinguished positions, I believe that a great many of his happiest moments were spent among students. And the calm joy that he exuded in their company stays with me. And whenever I feel it, I'm thankful that he taught me how to be a teacher. Thank you.